what extent do we have free will? Why does climate change feel ideological? Will genome data collecting test the limits of surveillance? Is it possible that our intuition has been hacked? This is Through Conversations podcast, where curiosity goes from the human genome to the cosmos. We'll talk with the most brilliant minds that focus on answering all of these questions, and many more. This is Alex Levy. Hope you enjoy the show. Where do we come from? What makes us human? What does it really mean to be a social animal? We explore these questions and many more with Isabel Behncke. Isabel is a scientist, a field ethologist who studies the social behavior of animals, including humans. She has a PhD from Oxford, a master's from Cambridge, and 2 more degrees from University College of London. Originally from Chile, Isabel was the first South American following great apes in the wild. She walked more than 3,000 kilometers in the Congo jungle, studying a community of wild bonobos, our closest living relatives, together with chimpanzees. She is also a TED Fellow and award-winning integrative thinker who applies an evolutionary lens to the modern challenges that people and our planet face. This episode will blow your mind. We talked about how we resemble our primate cousins, the bonobos, in so many ways, including the importance of play in the way we flourish as individuals and as communities, the effects that lockdown may have on social interactions, key differences between virtual meetings and real-life encounters, the importance of our senses, evolution, and much more. I believe that this conversation enlightened me in a big way. Isabel is truly an amazing person, and her passion for understanding the underpinnings of what makes us is very contagious. With you, Isabel Behncke. Hi, so I'm here with Isabel Behncke, and I'm very excited for this conversation because I know it'll lead to a great deal of things that we can touch on regarding what's happening around the world, what can happen and what can we do about it and how can we think about it. So Isabel, tell us a bit about yourself. How do you introduce yourself to people who are not familiar with you?
Hello, Alex. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Isabel Behncke. I am an evolutionary biologist, a primatologist more specifically. That means that I study the behavior of animals in the field. So that includes studying the behavior of bonobos. Bonobos are, together with chimpanzees, our living closest relatives. But I also study the behavior of humans, given that we are human primate. And I also study behavior of other animals. So I ask questions about social behavior and put them in context of natural habitats.
Wow. And I love to get on everything that you mentioned: social cooperation, complex systems, us being primates, human primates. So I'd love to get on that. But firstly, I'd love to say a quote from your TED Talk, what we can learn from bonobos about play, which will contextualize what I'll love to talk about. So, quote, "Play suspends reality. Things that don't normally happen can happen. Play loves risk and uncertainty, when in other circumstances we hate uncertainty. We need to adapt to an increasingly challenging world through greater creativity and greater cooperation. The secret is that play is the key to these capacities. In other words, play is our adaptive wildcard. In order to adapt successfully to a changing world, we need to play." So, wow, a great quote. And how does play enter the equation given today's context?
It's a great question, and it's very difficult because, of course, the first thing that you learn when you study play in animals is that fear and stress tends to suppress play. And at the moment, we are living through a period of great fear and stress. because of the uncertainty at all levels that the pandemic has brought. So naturally, our physiology is not feeling like very playful at all. So I would say, so people that are listening to us, the first thing is that just know that that is happening, and know that that is normal, and that if you do not feel very playful, it's because you are an animal that has a physiology that is now under fear and stress. Having said that, it's very important that we also find ways to curb the excess fear turning into panic. And play behavior is a wonderful, wonderful way to increase your resilience. And so finding ways that you can build play spaces in your life, however difficult it is at the moment, it will really go a long way. So laughing with a friend, laughing at funny videos, reading or watching anything that will make you laugh. Laughter happens in play. So that is one thing that you can do. Or any creative endeavor that you can engage in at the moment where you feel relaxed, whether it's cooking or working with your hands and plants or whatever it is. Play comes in many, many forms.
Yes,
So,
yes.
Yeah.
And you mentioned cooking. So right now, most of us are cooking and washing dishes like we've never did before in our house. I guess. I include myself in that particular category because I've been cooking for my family. I've been cleaning the house, and I've been putting music while doing it, and it feels like play. So
oh, that's wonderful. Oh, that's so great. Yeah, playing loud music while moving around, it's a fantastic form of play.
yeah,
That's great.
Yeah, and it does, as you mentioned, like sharing a laugh. And one of the unforeseen consequences during this pandemic has been how close I've been with my family, because life was going at a rapid pace before the pandemic. Life was, I had my workspace, I had my college, my classes, and I went outside the house. And right now everything's here. So my father is in the house, my brother, and we're sharing like this habitat and this living space, I should say, which is cool. But one thing that concerns me regarding play is right now we're seeing sports again restarting, which is a great deal of importance. It gives us hope and it gives us something to look up to. But I'm concerned about the long-term effects of social interactions due to isolation. So what are your thoughts on this? Does it have a long-term effect on interactions, this lockdown?
I am very concerned about that too. I am concerned not about the interactions as such, because I think once we are able to do it, we will start interacting again. But the quality of the interactions, given the mental health consequences of long-term isolation. We are social primates. We evolved in a highly social context, and we form bonds with others through face-to-face and direct physical contact.
Wow.
The absence of face-to-face and direct physical contact affects, first of all, our mental and physical health immediately. And then, of course, the long-term consequences on the effect on the quality of relationships, it's also of concern. And of course, this is true for people who are isolated in their homes, but it can also be true for people that are spending quarantine with others, because the quality of those relationships many times is highly stressed as well. So I think in many ways we are living through what we might call a collective trauma.
Wow. Yeah, it's weird that we didn't think of being bounded through these interactions in both ways, as you say. So not seeing people, and also the implications of not seeing people face to face. One of the cool things about our evolutionary code is that when we see each other and when we hug each other, when we see to each other's eyes, oxytocin releases, serotonin releases, and these are good chemicals, good things. So I don't know if through Zoom, for example, virtually, or through social media, that happens as well. Maybe more dopamine triggers and more instant reactions. So those virtual interactions substitute face-to-face encounters?
Yes and no. And the first, I will explain the yes part. Virtual interactions help maintain relationships that without the virtual interactions would deteriorate much faster. Because unless you are a very, very close relative, friends and other types of relationships need to be maintained in order for them to last in time. When you do not see or interact with somebody in a long time, the quality and closeness of that relationship goes down, right?
Yeah.
So one benefit of, and this I say because it's important for us to know that at least we have this. You and I are talking over Zoom. And if you think what we're doing now, think that only a few years ago, we would have had, say, to communicate with a letter. A letter, of course, has language, but it does not have voice. So already having the channel of voice gives you a lot more information than just a written text can. So I'm saying this because you can think of forms of communication as an increasing arrow of multimodality. So imagine, first you have a written letter, which you send into space and is of an asynchronous nature. You do not have somebody there who's giving you immediate feedback. Then you can have an email who, like, in theory, and hopefully it has a quicker response time.
Yeah.
So the feedback loop is faster. Then you can have a text message that at least the text message has typically more emotional content because of emojis or stickers or things like this, right? And also a faster response time. And many times you can see if the other person is online too. Already that sense of presence helps. And then when you go from text message to voice, you increase the amount of information that you're giving the other person, because it's all what we call the paralinguistics. So it's your tone, the inflection, the speed. You are gleaning so much information than just the mere words. And then, of course, now with Zoom, we add the visual layer. And the visual layer, I'm talking and I see you nodding. So, I'm getting some immediate feedback, and now you smile and I'm smiling in response. So we are in a synchronous interaction that we are truly conversing. So in that sense, imagine that we would not be able to do this. We are able to maintain relationships and have conversations that otherwise we wouldn't. So that's the yes part to your question.
Yes.
And then, of course, there is also the no part to your question, which is of however great it is that I can see your face, I can't smell you, I can't touch you. I can, and of course, for lovers, this is particularly a problem. But we often don't realize how much we use social touch in all sorts of interaction. Even, for example, there are experiments that show that when somebody puts their hand on the arm of another person, you are able to convey so much information there. Our skin we are designed to be able to glean social information from touch, but also from smell and from body posture. Zoom often does not have the camera positioned in the way that allows us to follow eye gaze very much. For example, if I would invite people who are listening to us to do the following experiment. Have a Zoom with 4 or 5 people, and then when you can, or if you can, have a dinner party with 4 or 5 people, and realize how natural it is when you're having a dinner party to interrupt, for conversations to break into 2 or 3 people, to come in and out, for people to know when they talk, and how difficult it is to do the exact same thing with the exact same number of people in a Zoom call, in a video call. That is because we're lacking the other elements of that. Although Zoom is more multimodal, many other forms of communication than just text, it still lacks these other layers. So of course, if you see it as a continuum, it's good to have it, but it's not nearly as good as the real thing. And we get what we call Zoom video screen fatigue as well, because you're having to make this extra effort that you wouldn't have to do in person. So it's also true for people who are doing classes, online classes. You have to know yourself that you'll be more tired and you'll be able to pay less attention for the same amount of time if you're learning through Zoom than if you're learning in person.
Wow. No, that's so true. I feel when I was taking classes, back in the semester virtually, it gave a sense of not uncomfort, between the classmates and the teacher, just a sense of tension, when to speak, when to participate.
Yes.
And those kinds of cues, as you say, happen between the words, happen between the interactions. And as you say, nothing can replace our evolutionary code to feel it. So it's been years in the making, millions of years in the making, thousands of years in the making, that when I touch someone by the hand, I remember from the book Blueprint by Christakis, he said that when you shake someone's hand, you can see the soil, how is it cold or is it hot, and it brings so much information just then a handshake, and that's how it evolved.
Yes, exactly. And I'm glad you mentioned Nicholas Christakis. First of all, his work is wonderful, and also I would invite the people who are listening to us to follow him on Twitter, because his analysis of the pandemic, given his experience, he's a very wise voice to hear. And then, so you mentioned Nicholas Christakis' point on hand shaking. And so that brings us to touch, just the sense of touch in general. And like, for instance, now I'm holding a coffee cup and it's warm. And there's been great research in showing all the communication between your skin and your emotional and your cognitive brain. So how you think of people, literally, I am thinking of you warmer because I'm holding a warm cup of coffee, and of course, if we were like
points for me.
Exactly. It's like, I perceive you so much nicer, warmer. I will pour some ice on my drink instead, and then she's like, "Oh, this guy's a bit cold."
Yeah.
But that is just, I think it's a point worth thinking today. That of course Zoom gives us the visual component, and in terms of the senses, the life of the senses, even Aristotle, when he ranked in order of importance the senses, he put vision at the top and touch at the bottom. Probably because touch used to be thought as something bestial and shared with animals, even shared with plants, right? And I think when we think of the life of the senses, you can imagine being deaf, and you can imagine being blind. But it's very difficult to imagine a life without the sense of touch.
Wow.
But now, right, in the pandemic, you can, particularly for people who are isolated, the sense of the lack of social touch has been so poignant. And I wonder, all this extra cooking or puzzles or gardening that people are doing, still it's kind of perhaps palliative to have our sense of touch with other things. Even washing the dishes for a long time, you get like the warm water in your hands, and then the cold dish and the different textures. Perhaps we're more aware of the importance of touch now.
Yes, definitely. And on that idea as well, the lack of it has been weirdly noticeable, as you say. For example, I've seen some family members outside a house that don't live with me, for example, with social distancing, with, I put like 1,000 face masks on, and I went to see in a park my grandpa and my grandma, which is I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't recommend it. I saw my aunt, I saw my cousins, and there's this initial reaction, this literal impulse. You want to hug them. You see them as family. You want to hug them.
Yes.
And
yes.
and I remember myself just leaning towards them without closing, but just feeling myself having the urge to hug them. And we both said, me and my cousin, which is from my age, he said, it feels, I want to hug you, but I can't. And it did feel so weird, because as stressing out what we're talking about, it's just this technology that is embedded in us that we can't take away from. And just adding to the notion of handshakes, and you having a glass warm coffee in your hands. I remember an experiment that I did on the streets of New York, where they asked people to read a poem holding either a coffee or an ice coffee.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
So the people, on average, mostly the people who read the Shakespeare poem with a warm coffee felt that related the emotions, love, pleasure, warmth, closeness, kindness. And the people who didn't, and who were grabbing the ice cold coffee, they said that it was cold. It felt, outside of it didn't connect with them. So it's crazy.
Wow, great. So just right to the point then. Wow. Yeah, that's notable.
So one of the things that I've been trying to get my head around is the fact that we're rational beings. And that's one of the aspects that differentiate from our primate cousins, bonobos, for example. We can see the future. We have the prefrontal cortex. We can make judgments. We're conscious of ourselves. But on the other hand, we have these evolutionary blueprints. So is there a trade-off between, what makes us animals in some form and what makes us human? How can we override our evolutionary embedded code through rationality? Is that possible?
Let me reframe the question. I think our rationality is part of our evolutionary inheritance. It is not separate. Our ability to think and comes from our frontal lobes or prefrontal cortex, which then, and also let me backtrack a little bit. Bonobos also have prefrontal cortex, only that, of course, the prefrontal cortex is smaller than us, and the brain is about a third smaller than our brain. And so we are primates, they are primates, and we belong to the family of the great apes, together with gorillas and chimpanzees and orangutans. Human apes split around 6 to 7 million years ago from the last common ancestor that we shared with bonobos and chimpanzees. So they have evolved, and we have evolved separately during the last 6-7 million years, changing along the way. Part of our change was that we developed obligatory bipedality, i.e. that we have a lifestyle that is obligatory in 2 feet, and they still have a lifestyle that is adapted to the trees. But also part of our change was that we grew brains much bigger than we had before. So they can also think in causal ways, I think, which is what we would call rational. And there is increasing evidence that we are not the only animal that can mental time travel in the future.
Wow.
Or in the past. Yeah, it's super exciting research, because of course we used to think that humans were the only animal that had the freedom to to propel your mind forward into the future and back to remembrance of the past. The best evidence coming from this line of research is from corvids, so birds that belong to the family of crows. So crows and parrots are the kind of equivalent of great apes in the bird for birds. Because why do I say this like perhaps weird thing? Because they have very large brain to body ratio, and although they don't have a prefrontal cortex as mammals do, they have a structure that is basically the homologue. They have highly complex societies, and there's evidence that shows that they can plan for the future. Is very exciting. Of course, I think I still concur with you in the larger point. Humans, we can plan into the future and anticipate future interactions to a degree that at least animals that we understand and know of cannot. So I'm not saying that we are exactly the same, but we are animals, and that is part of our evolutionary inheritance. Uh, Rather than override it, I would say that we can use it to create niches that hopefully are better for us than the ones we have created in different ways that are now not proving appropriate for the context of the biosphere at the moment. So part of our evolutionary inheritance is that we're cultural beings. That means that we learn from each other, that culture is very important, that culture is different, and that we adapt to culture as well. So if you take that evolutionary inheritance, it means that we have the capacity also to change culture. And that is what we call cultural niche construction. So, in the same way that a worm constructs a niche, a physiological niche for itself, we construct cultural niches. And then we adapt to these niches. And when you adapt to a cultural niche, the cultural niche feeds back onto you. It's a feedback loop. So there is a locus of change in that process that I've just described. Because you change culture, culture feeds back onto you, and by doing so, changes the selective pressures of behavior in people. I take one example is how smoking is viewed. So when I was your age, a long time ago, I was going to university in Chile, smoking was not seen as something bad. And we would smoke in class, we would smoke in cars, we would smoke everywhere. Everywhere, like inside class, I would lit up a cigarette. Can you imagine now? Now you laugh because that's crazy today.
Yeah,
right?
it's like it feels like a complete parallel universe. It doesn't
Exactly.
it doesn't fit into the to today.
Exactly. And imagine it wasn't that long ago. I mean, I'm not quite ancient
No, yeah.
yet, right? So that means, and what happened? Well, the cultural meaning of smoking changed. The smoking itself remains the same, but the cultural meaning of smoking changed. And then that culture changed, and it fed back onto the behavior of individuals, such as me, so much so that I quit smoking.
Wow.
And now, not only for you, it would be, you wouldn't conceive of somebody lighting up a cigarette in a class, and I wouldn't conceive of it. If I would see somebody do that, I would go like, "What are you doing?"
Yes.
So it's an example of behavior change that is led through cultural change. So that's an example of cultural niche construction. That was a long way to answer your question, but
no,
I hope,
it was great. It was great. That was my question was going to be how exactly is the feedback between biology and culture, and you just answered it perfectly. It's a feedback loop. So they each other. It's reciprocity. Biology dictates one thing, then culture, and so forth. Culture, biology, and well, the thing is that just taking it to a higher level is how much so do genetics play within the cultures that we're in? So the relationship between biology, genes, and culture, is there something in that sense working out?
Well, of course, and you have multiple interactions. So, first of all, well, your genes are the blueprint that build you.
Yes.
Gene expression is affected by the context in which the genes find themselves. So, and that has so therefore there is a certain amount of plasticity, but that plasticity is not infinite. So, if you put your genes in a different climate, your genes will still produce a human. They will not produce a chicken, right? and your genes will produce a human that is bound of a certain, has a certain height range and so on. So that is the plasticity of the genes is bound. And at the same time, the genes have resilience. So you can disturb the growth process of that human, and it will respond along predictable lines. But again, there will still be a human, not a chicken.
Yeah.
And part of the inheritance of those genes is that human will respond to cultural cues and social learning that produces culture.
Yes, going back to Nicholas Christakis in his book Blueprint, he mentioned that you probably know the name, but there is this group of people who live very, very near. Actually, they one could say that they live in the water and they go fishing like very, very deep into the waters, and they fish with the spears, and it is now evident that they have longer capacities to breathe, to hold their breath in the water, right?
Yeah, and there's also this group of people have adaptations in their eyes that allow them to see better underwater. So
Wow.
that's a great example of basically a population that is very well adapted to getting their food through diving.
And do we know, like, for example, me and you and them, this group, I'll put the name in the bio once I remember it. Do we all have this propensity for those genes to activate, or was there any particular difference between them and us, or do we have, what I'm trying to say is, do we all have the same gene code, I should say?
Yes, we have the same gene code, but in time, it probably means that this population has been relatively isolated from other humans and engaging in the cultural practice of this kind of foraging. So that's when you have a really nice interaction between culture and biology for such a long time that it has selected for traits that allow them to be even better at the cultural practice of swimming underwater.
Wow, that's just these topics just melt my heart, because it gives so much depth into who we are and who we can be, and all the diversity that it's in the world, and I love it. So you mentioned complex societies, and bonobos also act on them, and from what I understand, please correct me if I'm wrong, I probably am, is that they live in hierarchies. There's always usually a leader within them, and then it can change, it can shift, but usually there's this not a pyramid, but there's a hierarchy in some form. And what I'm sensing now, more especially from my generation and younger generations, is this desire to become decentralized. So do you think within our from an evolutionary perspective, is it possible to live in a decentralized society?
It is possible to have societies that have more or less relative hierarchy, because of course, and it is also possible for the hierarchies to be more or less linear. Let me explain what I mean by linear. For example, in a typical company, you have the CEO, right? So you have like the alpha person. The alpha person is dominant to the beta person. the beta person in turn is dominant to the C person and to the D person in turn, right? And when you follow the structure, the alpha person, it follows that the alpha person is also dominant to the D person, right? So that is what we call a linear hierarchy. Chimpanzees, for example, tend to have hierarchies that are more like this. Bonobos have hierarchies that are more transitive or complex or not so well established. So I may be dominant to you in one context, but not in another, or I may be dominant to you, and then you may be dominant to another individual, but not necessarily means that I am dominant to that other individual. You
Wow.
see what I mean?
Yeah.
So in that sense, bonobos, I don't see it. Societies are not like, black or white in terms of hierarchy or lack of hierarchy. I think when you look in nature, you find hierarchy, but the how the hierarchy is distributed, that is what changes. And of course, we may be able to change it in particular directions through culture and also how through resources are distributed
Yes.
through our ecology.
And you, trying to keep on that line of thought is that in a complex society, of course, we tend to have friends, but does the way we make friends, the way we interact with other people, resemble those of our cousin primates? Do they make friends the same way as we do?
Well, the first thing is that both them and us, we make friends through direct physical contact and play and laughter and investing in social time. So, of course, there are some obvious differences. Now you and I are communicating through Zoom and we have symbolic language and they don't. But effectively, it is as if we are engaging in a grooming session.
Yeah.
Imagine through the use of language rather than physical touch. But when you go to the pub with a friend or for lunch or for dinner, you are engaging in a shared social activity and you invest time. You Time is part of, it's a very valuable resource, of course, that animals use differently to invest in different things. So both them and us, we invest our social time budget in creating and maintaining relationships through direct face-to-face contact and through touch. So that, of course, it's a similarity, and also through play.
Yes, I see. Those countries that are opening right now. For example, the UK. I saw some videos, especially in the United States. I saw that the day that they opened, and here in Mexico, also some malls were filled with people. So it seems that, as we mentioned before, this desire to make friends and to see people face to face, it is also an unforeseen consequence of how much we cherish it. And I think in the future we'll see more of it happening rather
Yeah.
than just stopping. So expanding on this resemblance between us and our cousins, primate cousins, let's say that we can create a society from scratch right now, you and me. Let's say that. How would you do it? Where would you start? What things would you take into account? How would you assemble our society?
Oh, that's a big question. It's a subject for an entire podcast. First of all, I don't think we can create a society from scratch. Because even if it were in theory from scratch, we already come with a particular biology, a particular set of context, an age, an ecological context.
Yes.
So, and I say that not just as an academic pedantic point, but because I see a lot of like highly theoretical arguments for what if we were XXX, like wishful thinking type of, and one of the first things that you learn when you watch animals in nature is that societies respond to their ecological context. So when thinking of creating societies from scratch, I don't think it's possible. The society will respond to ecological context. And ecological context means where, what the places, what, how the, anything from your weather patterns to your food sources, how your resources are distributed, who has resource holding potential. Yeah, is it males? Is it females? Is it a certain age group? Can resources be distributed? How limited they are, etc., etc. And these patterns influence greatly the type of social interactions and the mating systems that societies have. So that is just like a small caveat when you engage in your game of like assemble your own society. Think also how you assemble the ecology for that society.
That's precisely right. I agree. And having more of a humble approach to our ecologists would be a good thing in the future. I've had a guest. Her name is Rachel Armstrong, and she's working with living architecture, trying to associate more of the concrete jungle with a nature jungle, with a real jungle. So it's a good thing. And I like what you're saying. So this notion that we can start from scratch is just putting into the words of Steven Pinker, is we're not a blank slate, and neither is our ecology.
Yes.
And it is important to acknowledge it because it can give us so much insights about who we are and who we can be. So thank you for saying that. One of the big ideas for me has been, we as humans have faith in our lives. We have religion. Do you think it serves, how did it get to be, from an evolutionary perspective? How has faith played a role in our development?
Faith is part of a set of cultural beliefs that has a synchronizing effect. So stories, narrative, myth, as well as collective celebration and collective ritual are very important for humans because they bond us, they bind us, and they bond us. And that means that they bring us together in common identities. And when humans are brought together in common identities, then collective action is easier. So first of all, there's that effect at the group level. Collective action is easier, and cooperation at that level is easier. And then, of course, if then we go about specific examples of faith, such as, we're both from Latin cultures with Christianism and Catholicism are common. It has a specific set of behaviors that it enforces. But I think if you think generally about faith and religion, the first thing is thinking about group identity and how it facilitates collective action.
Wow. And that's, you mentioned identity and group identity, and I remember a quote that my cousin, the one that I mentioned before, said that during a conversation, a deep conversation or a meaningful conversation, no identity can survive. That's a great thing to just reiterating that this conversation has been amazing, and it feels like play.
Oh, how lovely.
Yeah. So just wrapping up, Isabel, what are your thoughts for the future, for us giving this context? What are you thinking right now, and what would you like to share with us, just to wrap up?
First, I'd like to share that I do not own, unfortunately, a ball to foresee the future. And I think we try as public intellectuals and scientists to be as rigorous as we can, but also as to engage in epistemic humility. We do not know the future, and that has become, I think, more patent than ever. So I do know that life has always been uncertain, and that perhaps, as Harari put in put in his book, we went from animals to gods. But now the pandemic has shown that I don't think we were quite gods, maybe demigods.
Wow.
But I think the Greeks warned us correctly about the dangers of hubris. And I think I would hope that that is a lesson that we can take today in the sense of our relationship with the earth and what we have done or are doing to nature, and how we thought we could be divorced from our origins as a species,
Yes.
but also how we thought we could be divorced from our origins on Earth. It's wonderful to explore the moon and Mars, and I hope Elon Musk keeps going. But one thing is, but as an explorer, as a fellow explorer, I know that you explore better if you have a safe home and you know where your home is. And our home is Earth. So I think I hope we can explore the entire solar system by remembering that home is Earth, and that neither we can nor is a good idea to feel that we should divorce from it. So the pandemic shows the close relationships that we have with nature, both in the process of zoonosis, i.e., when a virus jumps from a non-human animal to a human animal. Coronavirus is an example, Ebola is an example, HIV/AIDS is an example. There will be more.
Yes.
But the more we can protect healthy habitats and the more we can stop consumption of wildlife, we can protect ourselves from increasingly frequent and severe pandemics. But the bottom line of this is that we're not apart from nature, we are part of nature. And that goes for nature as Earth, but also our own nature and our origin. So I think that would be my thought.
Wow. And it's just a great way to wrap up, and just echoing your ideas. Andrew Maynard was a guest in the show, and he shared with me and with the audience an idea that the Earth could be seen as a spaceship. And I told him, well, yes, I agree, and it's a great way of thinking about it. And now we're trying to build spaceships to get out of our spaceship, our meta spaceship.
Yeah.
But this Earth, our spaceship, our home, needs maintenance. Needs, as you say, needs again. We're not isolated, and we need to connect with it. And as you say, it's a great opportunity to become more humble about our origins and become more conscious about our place as leaders in nature. If I dare to. Yeah. So.
I think leaders in nature is a great concept, and I think we have very concrete actions that we could follow in that sense. Say you're a leader in a group, you could say, let's conserve 1/3 of Earth as healthy natural habitat. 1/3, man, 1/3. Imagine you have your own body and you were told, if you take care of 1/3 of your body, you can be healthy. I mean, that 1/3 is not much, right? Surely we can do 1/3 if you consider there is a home planet. So anyway, I like the concept of leader in that sense.
Yes, definitely. So, Isabel, this has been just mind-blowing experience, and one of the big ideas that I kept from your intervention in the debate, stay home or get out, is that these kind of situations, and perhaps most of situations in life, shouldn't be taken as a debate. First of all, they should be expanded. They should be a dialogue, and moreover, it's not about black and white, yes or no. It's about finding, our common ground with each other and trying to discuss and profundize on ideas that can make an impact on people. And in starting this podcast, you mentioned resilience, and I do hope that this gives us a lesson for it. As a group, we need to care for each other more, and those ideas stay with me for a long time for my development. So I thank you so much for joining me, Isabel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Alex, and congratulations on your work. I love the way you ask questions and you weave the different knowledge of different people into your worldview and your inquiry. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in for this edition of Through Conversations podcast. If you find this episode interesting, don't miss out on new conversations and subscribe to the podcast at any podcast feed you use and leave me a review. Also, consider sharing it with someone you think can enjoy this episode. Our new awesome music is by Joe Lyle. More info can be found at joelyledrums.com. Hosted and produced by Alex Levy. Special thanks to Momentum Clothing for supporting this episode. 10% of the money Momentum Clothing raises will be donated to different organizations that are responsible for improving the lives of many people. The 4 organizations are the Ocean Cleanup, Black Lives Matter, Cadena ACE, and Keret Kayemet LeIsrael, Mexico.